and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we will be discussing Lord of the Rings fanfiction. Lord of the Rings.
We've already done the Lord of the Rings fanfiction episode, to be fair.
I know, and I have to not talk about that this whole time. We are going to be discussing The Fellowship of the Ring, the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. As Sarah said, we've already done an episode on fanfiction and also an episode on The Hobbit. Would you call that the prequel? It was the first book. This is the sequel.
That's true, actually.
I mean, weight-wise, Lord of the Rings feels so much bigger.
And also, I think in terms of scope.
Yeah, weight was length and also content, and I was using that word wishy-washily.
Multi-purpose.
Yes. Before we get to that, though, Sarah, what's something great that happened recently?
Something great that happened is I went backpacking with my father, which was a lot of fun. I did get eaten alive by mosquitoes.
Sounds like you have a little bit of Hobbit in you, huh?
I was going to say, it was actually the perfect place to be reading The Fellowship of the Ring. And I felt a new sympathy for the hobbits and how they're walking like 20 miles a day, which is a lot to be carrying a pack.
That's a lot. And it's probably not all flat. There's probably not a trail.
I think sometimes there's a trail.
Sometimes, sure.
But it's not all flat. And they do talk about how they, like, I think they specifically say at one point that they're doing about 20 miles. For comparison, my father and I did 5 in 2 days. Granted, that's partially because my father is 73. He just cannot walk that far carrying a big, heavy pack.
Frodo's like 70. That's the same.
True.
Oh, Aragorn. I should have gone with Aragorn. Frodo's only 50, huh?
Yeah, Frodo's only 50. Yeah, I think I probably could do about 10 miles a day carrying a pack, which is still a lot less than 20.
And they have such short little legs.
Yeah, a mile is harder for them.
Well, my good thing is that my parents are visiting. My dad has been up here for a little while, and my mom just came up recently. She was busy. And they're reunited now, and it's very cute.
Tell them hello for me.
I will. Really, I feel like 10 million things have happened, so I just defaulted to the easiest one.
I mean, it's a valid good thing, though.
It is. It encompasses a lot of the other good things.
You're not obligated to explain every single good thing that happened to you on this podcast.
It's so funny, though. I feel like some weeks we get to that question and I'm like, oh, fuck. Have I done anything in the last 7 days? And this time I'm like, what haven't I done?
It definitely is the hardest question that we ask.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad we get it out of the way early. Well, on that note, what are you drinking this evening?
I thought that it would be very appropriate to bust out my mead. I made mead, lemon mead, because I have a lot of lemons, as I've complained at length on this podcast before. And this is the first time I'm actually drinking it. It turned out okay.
Excellent. Glad to hear.
It's nowhere near as scientific as your winemaking experiments.
Well, Daniel loves his spreadsheets. I am drinking nothing nearly so homemade, just a bottle of pre-mixed margarita.
That does sound lovely, though.
Yes, it's leftovers from our 4th of July barbecue yesterday. Oops, did I sneak in another good thing?
I think you might have.
I can't break the rules. I made the rules. Well, Sarah, have you read anything good lately?
I've done a lot of, well, not a lot of reading for Subjective Chaos. I've done some reading for Subjective Chaos. That's been good.
We read The Bruising of Kilwa, which is part of that.
Yeah. So I read, or I'm in the middle of reading, Kid Wolf and Kraken Boy by Sam Miller, which brings together gangsters, tattoos, boxing, and magic in a way that I didn't think would be compelling, but is.
I was going to say that sounds like superheroes, but I'm not wrong.
You're not exactly wrong. It's like 1950s superheroes, a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm enjoying that.
I have read something good lately.
Shock. Gasp.
Well, it's not actually good, but something I want to talk about. How's that? So I was looking up how long to cook meatballs in the oven for? And I've known that there are a bunch of articles on the internet written by AI, but I had never actually run into one, or at least not one this obvious.
Oh no.
It is kind of stunning.
Is it giving you instructions on how to cook meatballs in an oven?
Yes.
Supposedly.
I mean, it is. And it does. And I followed the directions, and they came out a little dry, but nothing outside of the range of reasonableness. But my search term was, how long to bake meatballs at 350? The title of this article is, how long to bake meatballs at 350? I'm just going to read you the first 3 sentences. First paragraph, before the first ad, because guess how many of those there are? Ooh, it's not really going to get across the crazy capitalization that's happening. I'm going to try to communicate that with my voice. Baking meatballs can be tricky, which is why you're here today asking, how long to bake meatballs at 350? Meatballs should take no more than 20 to 30 minutes to bake in a 350-degree preheated oven. That is an optimum temperature for quickly consuming these delicious meatballs.
That sounds like the kind of essay that I wrote when I was about 10.
I lied. I can't stop now. What exactly are meatballs? A meatball is a tiny spherical ball of ground beef.
I think that this reading should be bonus Patreon content.
Anyway, it did tell me the answer I was looking for, but tiny spherical balls of ground beef is just, that is a sentence that a human did not write.
I mean, it's not exactly wrong.
No, it's not. Everything in it that I had gotten to, because I didn't read the whole thing, was factually correct. It was just so clearly inhuman.
That was pretty bad. It's
Yep.
true.
I was kind of stunned when I found it. I was like, the rumors are true.
I guess they are. Not even the recipe blogs are safe.
I think especially the recipe blogs aren't safe. Anyway, you can imagine what a relief it was for me when I definitely, absolutely cracked open the Fellowship to reread for this episode.
Mm-hmm. Tell us all about that reread, Lily.
Well, it absolutely, definitely happened. How to reread The Fellowship of the Lord of the Rings. First, you open the book that has pages. No, but I reread it recently, although not this week. And yeah, can't beat that prose.
Yeah, I was going to say, in your defense, you did read it fairly recently.
Yeah.
Not like me, who I'm pretty sure I haven't read it for a good 5 or 10 years.
Damn.
I genuinely can't remember the last time I read The Lord of the Rings. It was definitely before I started keeping track of my reading on Goodreads, which is about 5 years now.
It had been a long time for me before my recent reread. There are some long-ass books. Or at least, they're not fast books. How's that?
I don't know. I was kind of surprised rereading it because I obviously did reread it for this episode. Mm-hmm. I was surprised at how fast it went and how short it was. I mean, it's not short when you compare it to The Hobbit necessarily, but it's about, my copy at least, is about 450 pages, which I would say is very firmly average for a modern fantasy book.
And I think modern fantasy books are too long, so...
That's fair.
I think The Fellowship is the quickest read of the 3 of them. The next 2 get much more complex as far as character paths.
Yeah.
And we're bouncing around on different story arcs, and I feel like you need to slow down to really kind of absorb everything that's happening. This first one really does just feel like a slow unfolding of the world.
It's very much a travelogue.
Yeah. And similar to The Hobbit in that way, right? Our main Hobbit, our main Baggins, starts comfortably in the Shire. Gandalf happens, and then they slowly sort of have to encounter an increasingly wild and scary world around them. And then they get to Elrond, and then everything goes to shit.
And it makes sense that this book starts off more similar in tone to The Hobbit than the later 2 books, because he was trying to write a direct sequel, failed to write a direct sequel, but trying.
I am really absolutely going to insist on referring to Lord of the Rings as one thing, because you can't read just one of them. That's nuts.
It's definitely an incomplete story if you try to just read The Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah. I mean, when you frame it as Frodo encountering the world for the first time, in that way, it does, I think, have a pretty clear arc from completely familiar Bag End all the way through to I'm in a strange land, all of my friends are dead or gone, except for Sam. That's dramatic. He doesn't know what happened to them. He knows Gandalf is dead. And he just has to keep plugging farther and farther away from home. That's about as far as you can get. Not distantly, not physically, but it's absolutely his sort of entrance to the adventuring world. I guess I should have said we're not doing a spoiler tag by now, huh?
Yeah. If that hasn't become immediately evident, we are not doing a spoiler tag. These books have a major motion picture that most people know the story of, even if they haven't watched it or haven't read it. And it's just easier to not do spoilers for this, or to not have a separate spoiler section, I should say, because we will be talking about the book as a whole, but not the series as a whole. Episodes on Two Towers and Return of the King will be coming later.
Which makes it very hard to talk about. And that's part of why I am insisting on referring to this as the first third of one story. Because when we were writing notes for this episode, everything we wanted to talk about was this book in relation to the series as a whole, or in relation to the movie adaptations. Talking about just this introduction alone is kind of a challenge.
Well, I think it's mostly a challenge because we're so familiar with the story as a whole.
That's true.
Like if we were reading it for the first time, I don't think we would have issues with it.
Yeah. And it's also a series that's been done to death.
Yes, we are not the first people to talk about Tolkien or Fellowship of the Ring or Lord of the Rings.
No. So it's like, what new can we bring to the table just talking about the secret fifth Hobbit? That's about all I got.
I mean, we can talk about how great Glorfindel is, but I agree with Peter Jackson's decision to cut him out of the movies.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't add anything to the story, but I love him.
Speaking of the movies and our decision to not do a spoiler section, I actually think this series, I mean, of course, you will get something out of it experiencing it for the first time, but this story is so much about the journey. And there is so much in it that you get on a reread. Spoilers are really a non-issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There are some books where if you're spoiled, it really ruins your enjoyment of the story, but this is definitely not one of them, in my opinion.
I would even say, if you've tried to read this series before, this book, we'll pretend someone might only read Fellowship of the Ring. If you have tried to read this book before and bounced off of it, try watching the movies first. I actually think that really helps. It gives you a lot of visuals for all of the bazillions of characters and kind of a general plot outline that can really help you sort of jump into the text. And also that means on rereads, Sarah, like you said, you've experienced, it really loosens up.
Yeah, I mean, part of why I found it so much more accessible, I think, was because the most recent Tolkien book I read was The Silmarillion, which is much denser.
So accessible by comparison, maybe.
So possibly there's a little bit of comparison going on there mentally. But I do think that if you are having trouble with this book in particular, try watching the movies and see if you enjoy it. I actually watched The Fellowship of the Ring before I ever read the trilogy because I was still in my dad really wants me to read Tolkien, so I'm not going to phase. And then the movie came out and I was like, okay, yeah, I guess this Tolkien guy is pretty great. I'm going to read everything I can get my hands on.
And you were right.
And I was right. But I do think that helped with my enjoyment of the story and keeping track of who's who and all of the places that they travel through.
Absolutely. And you might be thinking, well, the movies are pretty close and I've seen them now. So why would I go back and experience the story in written form? And that's because Tolkien has the best narrative voice of all time. I said it.
I mean, he's a good author. It's true.
His use of language, I mean, it's what he does.
Yes.
It's very clear that he's a linguist. And they're dense, but they're not, intractable. It's just helps to slow down and take your time with the sentences because they're worth taking your time with.
I do think I would add a slight caveat to that, in that this is a very old school style of narration. You have to enjoy that kind of thing. If you don't, great narrative voice or not, you're probably not going to like the books.
Well, but you'll figure that out pretty quick. And maybe you've just read people doing it badly, and giving this a shot will change your mind. If Concerning Hobbits doesn't change your mind, I don't know what to do with you. Well, Concerning Hobbits, we spend a heck of a lot more time in the Shire than the movie ever does.
We do spend, what is it, like 17 years, 18 years?
There's the 17-year like time jump in between when Bilbo leaves and when Gandalf comes back.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think Frodo spends like a whole year getting ready.
Well, no, so doesn't, how am I mathing? Yes, I'm mathing correctly. So I know that Gandalf comes back like 9 years before Frodo leaves, and then Gandalf comes back for the final time. Like there's a big old gap between Bilbo's party where he leaves and Gandalf coming to talk to Frodo about the ring. And then there's another like long span of time. And then Gandalf says, Frodo, my dude, you really need to leave. And then Frodo spends a year getting ready.
He was that person going, oh, wait, just one more thing. It's a long ass time.
I didn't remember how thorough his going away preparations were, though. Like, he full on sells Bag End and pretends that he's moving to Buckland.
I love that. Frodo is such a thoughtful character. He actually makes a plan like, hey guys, if I just disappear, and by guys, I mean Gandalf, because he's the only person he's talking to this about. Sam comes into the fold eventually, but not right away. But yeah, if I just disappear into the night, everyone's going to talk about it, and that's not very stealthy.
It's true, although clearly he wasn't stealthy enough because Merry and Pippin and, as you mentioned, the secret fifth hobbit, Fatty Bolger, do call him out on that. And like, we know you have a plan to leave. We want in on this.
Oh, I love that. You really think we believe you're moving to Buckland? Really?
All of your comments about this is going to be the last time I ever see this view, so subtle.
I love the relationship between the hobbits. They're all clearly such old friends, cousins, right? Frodo, Merry, Pippin, and Fatty are all cousins of some kind or another, I think.
I think they're relatives, yeah.
And then, of course, Sam, who's just there. Poor Sam. They clearly have such a history, and that's really, like, obvious on the page, that they can give each other loving shit, and only the best cousins can do that.
It's true. They do have such a warm relationship that I really appreciated. Just seeing how they care for each other in little ways. I mean, I guess you have the big declarations too, like, I'm not going to let you go alone to deal with this evil by yourself, but just like understanding the way that his mind works and accepting it. Like, there's this moment at the end, and I just finished reading the book today. Well, the last like 50 pages today. But there's this moment at the end where Frodo's trying to decide what he's going to do. Is he going to go to Minas Tirith, or is he going to head off east by himself? And all of the other hobbits are like, well, obviously he's going to go east, but he's going to agonize over it because he doesn't want to put us in danger and things like that. And if we can't stop him, then we're just going to go with him. And I really appreciated just how they knew what he was thinking when no one else in the company does.
Well, it makes sense. They've known him for 50 years.
Yeah.
Aragorn's known him for like 3 months.
longer than 3 months, because we spend at least a month in Lothlorien.
Fair. Okay.
And I think there's another month in Rivendell too. But I think that in a lesser author, it would be easy for that kind of consideration to not express itself.
Or it could come off as a really cheap, like, plot device.
Yeah.
You know, well, you can't have the main character actually run off alone, so someone has to do something about it. But their relationships with each other have been so consistent throughout the whole book that by that point, you buy it, no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, question. Fatty Bolger is one of the hobbits who leaves Hobbiton to help Frodo on what they are not sure about, but are pretty sure is a life or death situation. They get to Buckland and they all decide most of us are going to go with Frodo, but someone's going to stay here to keep on the ruse of Frodo living here. Doesn't he actually even take on his name?
I don't think he takes on his name, but he has some of Frodo's old clothing that he puts on so that he can like look like Frodo from a distance.
Yeah. So like an entire decoy, if that's not devote, like he moves just as much as Sam, Merry, and Pippin upend their lives for Frodo's journey. Fatty Bolger becomes an entire decoy for God knows how long.
Not that long, because it ends when one of the ringwraiths comes to his door. So I think his deception is over pretty quickly.
Okay, but he intended to do it for as long as he could.
He intended to do it for as long as he could. And that is, you're right, that is true devotion. But I think in practice, it was probably more like a month.
Yeah, okay.
At most.
And then, he's there when shit goes down in Hobbiton, but we can't talk about that yet.
I don't know what shit goes down in Hobbiton. That's a whole other book. That doesn't happen in this book. Actually, it's alluded to in this book, but
yeah. So do we think he is extremely lucky that he doesn't have to go on this orc-infested Mount Doom mission? Or does he totally get shafted because all of these other hobbits are world-renowned heroes? And even though he was just as devoted and being just as helpful, he gets like none of the credit. He also had a much easier time, but he helped.
He did help. And I think it's a little rough that no one remembers him, because he, in the grand scheme of things, he's not important to this larger story. It's true. I don't know if I would call him lucky that he stayed behind, because he does have a very close encounter with Nazgul, or with a ringwraith.
It's not like he completely avoids danger.
That could have been very dangerous, as the text itself points out. But he doesn't have to deal with walking 20 miles a day carrying a heavy pack.
That's true. So yeah, Fatty Bolger, the secret hobbit, the secret adventurous hobbit.
The secret adventure. Yeah, he's not really a secret hobbit.
No. The forgotten hobbit.
He is the forgotten hobbit.
I mean, up until the point where they deviate from each other, he is just as much of a main character as Merry or Pippin.
Yeah, which is to say not very.
Right.
Yeah.
It really sets up an interesting situation for characters in this book that rings really true in a way. You don't know who's going to end up sticking around, and not through any fault of their own.
It's true.
I don't think of these as super dark books, maybe just because I know them so well and I know the ending, but they definitely set up a sense that no one is safe.
It's funny because I don't think of them as books that set up no one is, that set up no one is safe. But you're kind of right that there is a certain amount of character death in them. I mean, we have Fatty who almost dies. We have Gandalf who does die in this book. Well, those are the only two.
Boromir?
He doesn't die in this book.
Oh, that's right.
Boromir is still alive.
All right. Well, good for him. But it's on the flip side of that, you don't know who's going to last, but it's also you don't know who's going to step up to the plate, right? Like you have a series of characters that you meet in a town, and which one of them ends up really coming through, you don't know. Or at least the narrative doesn't necessarily give you clues. There's not like someone with a shining halo that you're like, oh yeah, that one's probably going to be important.
Yeah.
Some of them do. Aragorn does.
Not at the beginning.
You're right. He stays Strider for so long.
He stays Strider, and he's a really shady character when they first meet him, and like Butterbur warns them off of him, and is very concerned that they're listening to him and going with him.
Yeah. And
Sam is very
so suspicious.
Yeah, he's very suspicious for a long time.
I really like that though. It feels very realistic. Yeah, just that the narrative doesn't give too much away.
Yeah.
Which is a hard thing to talk about because everyone knows how it goes. You can see the clues when you're looking for them, sure. I guess that kind of undercuts our argument that there's no real spoilers, huh?
Maybe a little bit, but I think something that surprised me about this book that I had forgotten since it's been so long since I reread them was just how much it hints at events in the later books through not necessarily in the narrative so much as through dreams and foretellings that the characters have. Obviously, I remembered Galadriel's mirror, but there are a bunch of other little times when Frodo has some kind of dream about, Gandalf being held on the Tower of Orthanc, or someone has some kind of prescient dream, which I thought was fun.
Yeah, there is a lot more magic in the books than you think of, because this is such a, I don't know, magic is such a weird word to use. Some of it totally. Like the hobbits say a magic spell to summon Tom Bombadil to save them from the Barrow Wraiths. Barrow Wights?
Wights, yeah.
Wights. That's magic. Sorry, Tom.
Or Tom Bombadil just has really good hearing.
Maybe. But if it's that good, isn't it also magic?
But a lot of the magic is very quiet. It's not what I would consider like big showy magic.
And the showiest magic we get is the personification of evil itself, the One Ring. There's something there that I'm sure has been done to death. But yeah, just the idea that there are these forces that can help or hinder you, but it's the flashy, obvious ones that are really interfering with day-to-day life that are forces of evil.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I don't know. I would consider Gandalf lighting his staff to be kind of flashy in Moria.
That's true. Literally flashy, maybe.
Literally flashy, yes. But I think that in general, you're right. And all of the big stuff tends to be done by the big bad. And it's the little everyday stuff that's done by the quote unquote good side.
I don't think you have to quote unquote that.
No, I don't think I have to quote unquote that. I think they are just the good side.
I don't mind knowing who to root for sometimes. There is a place for complex narratives. I love them, obviously. But sometimes it's nice to just root for the good guy.
I do. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've said this before. I do I don't want to say turning my brain off, because you don't turn your brain off with this book, but I do like not worrying about whether the good guys are going to do some kind of horribly morally gray, act that is going to taint my perception of them.
Although that being said, not in this book though, huh?
No. If you're talking about Boromir, he does try to get the ring in this book.
Well, also Denethor.
Not in this book. Denethor who?
Yeah, Gollum. I would say I could make an argument for being right there in the middle, but not in this book.
Not in this book.
He is set up as almost as much of a victim, though. I'd say Tolkien is pretty sympathetic to Gollum.
It's true. I mean, he is very clearly set up as a victim of the One Ring.
Mm-hmm.
And Frodo is not very sympathetic, but I think as the reader, you are.
Yeah. Also totally makes sense. We're far enough away that we can go, he didn't deserve everything that happened to him. And whereas Frodo was going, neither do I.
Yeah, I imagine it's a lot harder to have some kind of distance from that situation, be sympathetic when you're right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, even so, Gollum's not, well, certainly in this book, he's not a main character at all.
Right.
I would argue that maybe in the later books he is more central, but he's still not one of our 9,
Oh, yeah. So part of this is me pushing back on a teacher I had in high school who said that these books are bad because they're too black and white. They're just good versus evil. So this is a topic I am going to harp on for way too long. But I've made a list.
I would argue that the overall theme is good versus evil, but that doesn't mean there's not nuance in the portrayal of characters.
Yeah, it is good versus evil, but what is good and what is evil? I think is a question that this book gets into. Not super
Sauron. Deep. Sauron is evil.
Yeah, okay, but then you get the question of using the ring against him. That's not evil, that's trying to defeat Sauron. It's just...
I'm pretty sure they fall heavily on the side of ultimately that's going to be evil, though.
But it's going to be evil because it's not going to work. that notion itself is not evil. It just would end up failing, I think.
Fair. Yeah.
And so, in that sense, does that make it evil? Because the outcome is? That's an ethics question that the philosophers can debate as long as they like. But I also have pulled out some points, mostly not as much about our main characters or specific characters even, but pushing back on the like monolithic races concept that some people have for Middle-earth. For example, hobbits, generally the good guys, but really that's just the Bagginses. For as great as the hobbits that we see are, Tolkien is pretty open about how cruel and small-minded a lot of the hobbits in Hobbiton are.
I get the impression that they're kind of xenophobic.
Oh yeah. Very isolationist, very xenophobic. So the Shire is not just this idyllic little place where everything is great. It sounds like it might actually suck to live there. Bree could be pretty cool because you have more diversity.
I don't think it would suck to live in the Shire if you were from the Shire.
Well, but also if you checked all their boxes.
Yeah.
The only reason why they're nice to Bilbo is because he's rich.
Yeah.
He's too weird otherwise.
That's very true. I mean, and they're not even that nice about other hobbits.
No, that's what I meant by Bilbo. He's another hobbit.
I guess, yes, he is another hobbit. I was thinking specifically of like the hobbits who live in Buckland, for example.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're so rude. But again, some of them are very nice, right? Hobbits have gotten reduced down to this caricature based on Bilbo Baggins, which is ironic because the other hobbits would hate that.
Bilbo and Frodo, you mean?
And Frodo. But I feel like Bilbo was the first one. I mean, he was. I'm right.
He was the first one. It's true.
Yeah. And there's the idea of the hobbits being clever and talking their way out of things, which is definitely more Bilbo than Frodo, I would say.
Yes. That's not necessarily a stereotype of hobbits that I am familiar with.
It's made its way into D&D anyway.
Fair.
The cunning. Luck and cunning. Anyway, humans, of course, can be great or terrible. That doesn't surprise anybody.
Or both at once.
Or both at once.
I mean, poor Boromir. He does have that moment where he tries to take the ring from Frodo. But in general, he's not a bad dude.
No, he can't handle, well, the pressures of his station and also the corruption of the ring. And that's a lot for one person to deal with.
Yeah, it's not necessarily his fault. I mean, the ring has a very specific effect on people, and there's no shame in not being able to withstand it.
Yep. We also get a very small jab at elves.
Lies and slander.
It's very subtle. I almost hesitate to even call it a jab. But there are several comments about how Tom Bombadil and his wife Goldberry are like elves in so many ways, but more approachable.
And I think there's a lot of points where Tolkien is very specific about the elves being distant and kind of closed off and focused inward and not really engaging with the world as it is.
Absolutely. Sort of similar to the issues with the hobbits, except for very different reasons. I think there's a lot of themes in this book around needing to be a citizen of the world and not just wrapped up in your own bullshit.
Yeah, although even with the elves, I think that's expressed a little differently than it is with the hobbits, because the elves, they're very melancholic. Like, they know that the world is changing and they've accepted that they have to be citizens of the world, in that they have to act against the One Ring, even though that means that their world is going to pass on.
Oh, yeah. In actuality, hobbits and elves are very different in that way. Or the hobbit culture and the elven culture are very different in that way. But it's the same sort of base commentary, right?
Yeah.
You got to engage.
Yeah. The elves are engaging. They're just sad about it.
Yeah. And they're engaging with world events, but they're not like chill to hang with, except for Frodo because they like him. We get to see their favorites, so they seem cool.
They're probably not much fun for ordinary folk.
they're probably only nice to the main character, you know what I'm saying? And of course we all think we're the main character, but would Galadriel think I'm the main character? Probably not.
I don't care if Galadriel thinks I'm the main character. I just need Glorfindel to think that.
All right. Do we tell the story about how there was a solid couple of years where we insisted on referring to the holiday of Christmas as Glorfindel Day?
You know, I had forgotten about that until you mentioned. Why did we do that? Did we remember?
I do.
I mean, it was something to do with me, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's your fault. You were saying Chrisma Hanukkah, and I said, why? And you said, because it was a fun word to say. And I said, well, in that case, you could call the holiday any word that's fun to say. And it kind of spiraled out of control.
I think it was Chris Mahana Kwanzaa.
I think you might have been 13 or 14 at the time.
We were both pretty young, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure that I was in that like 12 or 13 age range, which means you were like 9 or 10.
Yeah. The perfect age to egg you on. All right. So Glorfindel is more than just a holiday.
He's an elf lord. It's true.
Tell me more. Or I guess we're only talking about this book, so you can't. Because he shows up for like 5 minutes and then you never hear about him again.
Yeah, we're only talking about this book, so I can't, because he's not important to this book, really. I mean, he does a thing, but it's brief and over and then not relevant.
Well, he's an elf lord in that he's one of the most badass of the elves. And he's the only other person who's ever killed he's the only person who's ever killed a Balrog, right? Like, that's a big deal.
He's not the only person who's killed a Balrog. I think there are some other elves who have killed 1 or 2.
It's a short list.
It's a very short list. I'm not arguing there.
He's a big deal.
I don't think it's just Glorfindel.
All right, fine.
And Gandalf.
We don't know that.
We don't know that. That's true.
I was trying to dance around it.
I don't think it's just Glorfindel.
And he also has a great line about the ring wraiths that also isn't in this book, I don't think. So
yeah, okay. Ecthelion was the other one, the other elf.
All right.
Who was killed at Balrog. So it's 2 elves.
Very short list. So he's one of the most badass of all the elves. He saves Frodo and then gets completely replaced by Aragorn's girlfriend in the movies. And if that's not nepotism, I don't know what is.
No, but see, the decision to replace him with Arwen for the movies makes a lot of sense. Like, I love Glorfindel, obviously, but he doesn't have any place in the larger story. Whereas if you replace him with Arwen, you can have that through line of her relationship with Aragorn in the movies, and that sets it up really nicely.
I mean, I agree.
And it works much better.
It does.
So, like, no hashtag justice for Glorfindel needed.
But it was a good lead-in for you, wasn't it? So, do Arwen and Aragorn do anything in the books besides just pine for... Oh, I guess Aragorn does a little bit more than just pine for Arwen. But they do a lot of pining at each other.
We don't actually see that in this book. We see Aragorn pine a little bit in Lothlorien, but I don't think, like...
Doesn't he ask Bilbo to help him write a love poem for her or something? Not quite in that many words, but it's close.
I don't think so.
He's definitely sad about the pretty lady down the table. If that's not pining, I don't know what is.
I don't think that we get that in the scenes. Is
that not in this book?
I don't think so.
We definitely hear later about how he was sad in Rivendell, but maybe it was just after the fact.
Yeah, I don't think we really hear, because we don't see the scenes in Rivendell focus mostly on Frodo's reuniting with Bilbo.
But we do also get some of how Bilbo has sort of settled into Rivendell, and Aragorn's part of that.
We get a little bit of that. We get Bilbo and Aragorn going off to write a poem for recitation, but it doesn't really come up. And I can't remember the subject of the poem now. Maybe it's Beren and Luthien, but I don't think it is.
I think it is, because then he's sad about it.
I don't think so. No, so it's not about Beren and Luthien. It's about Arundel the Mariner.
All right. Never mind then.
And yeah, I don't think that we really see Aragorn pine over Arwen in Rivendell, but we definitely do see that in Lothlorien.
Is that what I'm thinking of? In Lothlorien, he's talking about the babe back in Rivendell, and that's why...
he has this moment where he says they're having their first glance at Lothlorien, and he is lost in thought and says something to Arwen in Elvish. And then when Galadriel asks, like, can I get you guys anything? He says, well, you've kept me from the one thing that I really want. And she says, oh, but Arwen left this brooch for you.
That's pretty piney.
I mean, yes, that bit is very piney. It's very piney, but I think that's the most piney that he gets. He's not really piney otherwise that we see in this book.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, my last comment for this novel that I do love, so don't take this the wrong way, but what the fuck, Tolkien? Why you gotta do the dwarves like that?
He was an elf guy, what can I say?
Clearly, the dwarves get the short end of the stick all the time. And it's an extra bummer because they kind of have their moment in The Hobbit, but not, even then, not really. And then we get to this, like, epic, and we're hearing about all these different groups of elves, and they're spending a month with them here and an overnight with them there. And then Gimli manages to get added to the fellowship, and then he's like, yeah, come see our really fancy city now. And then it's a bummer.
Womp womp.
Because dwarves just suck and are bad at the only thing they're good at, I guess. I don't know.
No, that's not. I think that's a little unfair. They had a rough time of it in Moria, it's true. The dwarves did, well, the Fellowship did too. But yeah, we do hear about them flourishing in Erebor.
That's good. That's good. The dwarves are greedy and got what's coming to them is something that you hear a lot about from Moria, and I don't think the book goes that far, but I can see why people think that.
Yeah, I think you're right that he doesn't pay them as much attention as he does other races.
No.
Specifically elves. It's clear that the elves were what he really liked.
Definitely.
They get all the good stories.
Well, Sarah, who should read this book?
You should read this book if you like epic fantasy, if you like an author who plays with language, also if you enjoy kind of old-fashioned language, because if you're coming into this looking for a modern prose, you're going to be very disappointed.
It came out in the 1950s, so it is a little antiquated compared to like super contemporary stuff. But it's not that bad.
No, I'm not saying it's bad. Like, I love it.
No, I know. I'm going into it in a little more detail.
Yeah. It's just I know plenty of people, sad as this is to say, I know plenty of people who don't enjoy the prose of The Lord of the Rings because they like a very contemporary kind of style. And that makes me sad. And I think they're wrong, but it is valid.
That's fair. I do think, though, if you've tried to read different older works and you've bounced off of it, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll dislike Lord of the Rings, though.
I agree.
Because it's not just antiquated, it's also beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, like, give it a shot, definitely. But just don't go into it expecting something that's as quick in the prose as some of the modern fantasy is.
And if you liked the movies, give the book a try.
And, you know, it's true that this is kind of one of the forefathers of modern fantasy. So it's worth reading, I think, in that respect as well.
It has cultural impact.
Yes.
Out the kazoo.
Absolutely.
There's anything on that? Out the kazoo.
Well, I think that's a good lead in to the weird word that I have for this episode, because I am a child.
Aren't we all at heart?
I'm going to read this quote, and I think you will have no trouble picking out what word I'm talking about, because I have the brain of a 14-year-old boy. There it casts its arms about the steep shores of the isle, it's talking about a river, and falls then with a great noise and smoke over the cataracts of Rauros down into the Nindalf, the Wetwang, as it is called in your tongue.
You almost broke.
I did.
You couldn't even say Wetwang with a straight face.
I couldn't. I read that quote a couple of times now, and I cannot say Wetwang with a straight face.
Do you think there is a counterpart somewhere in Middle-earth that is the dry wang?
I hope so. That's my new headcanon.
That's really all there is to say about it.
Yeah.
He must have known exactly what he was doing.
It probably has some grand philological,
You could just say linguistic.
Yeah. It probably has some grand linguistic, history, but it's also a wet wang.
Wang became slang for penis in 1933, probably from wang doodle, an earlier term for gadget.
I'm going to call all of my gadgets wang doodles from now on. I've got gizmos and wang doodles galore.
I am getting that embroidered on a pillow for you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FictionFansPod, and possibly more social media sites by the time you listen to this, because there's a lot of social media sites springing up, and honestly, I can't keep track of them. But you can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and possibly the full text of Lily's AI recipe.
The full text or a full recording, a dramatic reading perhaps.
Yes.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villain always be defeated.
Bye.
Bye.